Hello, my name is Justin Williams, and in this video I'm going to demonstrate the differences and similarities between two very common photo manipulation programs. GIMP, as in GIMP, also known as General GNU Image Manipulation Program, and the famous and most well-known Photoshop. These programs are used commonly by those who need to, advertise, market, or simply just want to be creative with their photos. Both these programs give users multiple and creative ways to edit or create digital photography, typically for profit, if we're being honest. However, there are some pros and cons when it comes to picking which to use. Some users might prefer Photoshop, some users might prefer GIMP. It just kind of depends on their situation, what they're necessarily looking for. First and foremost is when it comes to the differences, and the most glaring that why somebody might choose GIMP over Photoshop is that GIMP is actually free. You don't really pay anything when you go to GIMP. If you go onto their site, you simply just click this download button and GIMP just downloads for you just like that. So there's no download for GIMP. There's no paying for GIMP. It's just as simple as that. Now, for Photoshop, on the other hand, if you go to their main site, you can look here. It's going to ask you for a monthly subscription, and typically, if you were to do the generic one, it would be $20 a month. And so you would have to pay $20 a month to actually use it. There's no permanent way for you to use Photoshop. It's something that you would have to pay on a monthly or annual basis, which can be frustrating and be detrimental to somebody who's not in the best position financially. If you look further into the details, you see you have a yearly plan of $239 or monthly of $20 or $30, depending on what kind of version you would like. And this can just, easily add up to $1,000 over 5 years versus, just paying it one time for a program. And this can be, a little bit frustrating for people, especially when you just need the program, just for one picture or whatnot. But again, this is why, GIMP can be seen as more appealing than Photoshop. Another thing to consider when it comes to usage is hardware requirements. And hardware requirements, GIMP kind of takes over Photoshop in this aspect. If you look at GIMP and its requirements, you notice that it only needs at least 200 megabytes of memory to download. So that's a fairly small amount, and if I were to just download that, depending on your connection speed, it would typically take a minute or two because it's just so small, and when you only have 200 megabytes, you have way more room for other programs that you might want to be able to use. Not only that, but the processor that would be used for this is very, very low. Probably a low to mid kind of end processor to actually run GIMP, as it's not very intensive. One thing to also note is that GIMP only needs about 256 megabytes of RAM. Again, this is very low, and it doesn't need much. A very small computer you would buy for a couple $100 would be able to run GIMP with no problem at all. It's a very lightweight program, and any computer that isn't really small, I guess, would be able to run it. So Photoshop, on the other hand, has a little bit more intensive requirements. So if we look at Photoshop, we notice a couple of things. First, we notice that you need at least 2 gigahertz or a faster processor to run. And these processors are going on to the higher end of computers, computers that you might pay a couple $100 for. If you look at the RAM, we notice that there's at least 2 gigabytes, minimum, 2 gigabytes to actually run the program, but it's not probably going to run smoothly, and it might run into problems. You might actually have some lag, so 8 gigabytes is actually recommended. Another thing that you can note is that you need at least 3 gigabytes of memory to actually download the program, which first will take a minute to download. It'll take about a an hour or two, depending on your connection speed to download. And once you download it, it's still going to take up a lot of space for people who, you know, don't have much space on their computer. You know, above all this, when you actually run the programs, the difference becomes even more, you know, blatant. So if you head over to your task manager while you're running the programs, you can notice something very shocking. If you look at Photoshop and you look at the memory that it uses, you'll notice that the memory right here is 100 megabytes. And if we go down to GIMP, you'll notice that GIMP uses 44 and Photoshop uses Photoshop. So that's almost twice. And this is just me being idle, you know, not actually using the program. If I actually start using the program, I've noticed that, you know, it can go up to at least 4 times the actual memory that's been used by, you know, GIMP. So that's another thing, you know. For GIMP, you can run it almost any computer, and for Photoshop, it requires, you know, a lot of high-end computers to use. So if you're a user who wants to use a program without using too much, you know, processes, or you want to run other things in the background without interfering, you can easily use GIMP, you know, versus Photoshop. So moving on to the actual program itself. So if we look at both programs, again, as I've mentioned before, they are pretty much the same. You know, they have the same kind of options, you know, file, edit, you know, layer, filters, windows. It's pretty much the same thing. Almost kind of hard to tell the difference if you missed a couple of things. You know, you look over here to the right, we have layers, channels, paths. If you look here, we have the same thing, layers, channels, paths. Same thing. And if you look over here by the tools, it's the same kind of tools. They may be, you know, called something different. They may be labeled something different, but they're all the same. We have this lasso tool is here too. We have a text tool. That text tool is also here too with this little T right here. So again, they're very same. You know, there's not much different. The only thing that would be different would be how many options you have to choose on, you know, tools to change your picture. So if you look here at Photoshop, if you look at some of the settings, it's going to have a little bit more settings in comparison to GIMP. GIMP pretty much has all the settings it has for Photoshop. There's some missing, as it doesn't have all. But again, when it comes to, you know, getting those things, one thing that GIMP has over Photoshop is that even if it doesn't have those tools that Photoshop may have, it can download what they would call plugins to support those kind of tools that somebody might use. So plugins are typically found online on different sites where you can make on your own, and plugins can do just about anything. It just depends on what you would need. So we have one for layers, we have one for batch, we have one for, you know, beautify, you know, make your picture look better. You know, for contrast fix, lenses fun, refocus, basically anything you want. The list just goes down and on and on. So it just, honestly, when it comes to the tools you can use, they're pretty much head to head. It's just that with GIMP, you just have to download it for, you know, a certain tool. Another thing is that GIMP is a little bit more flexible. It's user friendly and customizable. So, for example, Photoshop is only limited to this one window. You know, it has a Windows thing, but it's only limited to this one window. GIMP, on the other hand, can be fully customized with shortcuts and whatnot. And you can also take your windows and you can change it so that everything is a window in GIMP, making it very customizable to what you would like it, depending on your preferences. So for somebody who would like to have GIMP a certain way, they can do that, but not necessarily with a Photoshop. So I'm going to go ahead and change that back. So again, GIMP, very user friendly, you know, for anybody who wants to not only edit the photos, but, you know, edit to their liking so they can use it in a different way. Not only that, when it comes to flexibility, GIMP also overtakes Photoshop, because since GIMP is a monthly subscription, since Photoshop is a monthly subscription, you can't actually take it on a hard drive or a USB or a portable device and go onto another computer because it requires a license. With GIMP, you can easily do that because it's such a small file and you don't need a account to actually use that. But with Photoshop, you actually can't. For each computer you have, you typically have to buy Adobe or create a whole nother account again for you to use Photoshop, which is again a pretty bad thing to do, and it can, accumulate to a lot of money in the long run. So in general, to wrap up the whole video, one thing to take in consideration is that GIMP is typically the better choice to use for people, just your average person who wants to edit photos. Photoshop would be used for people who would need it for professional reasons, or who would want to use it, to generate revenue, or somebody who would need it for something very serious and has the money to support that, or maybe for a school, in this example, who would like to teach their students to do something in a industry standard way. And that's the kind of advantage that Photoshop would have. But in almost every case, GIMP seems to be a superior program to Photoshop due to its cost, its customization, and just the hardware requirements, just everything in general. It would be a better choice to pick GIMP unless you're using it for more professionals or very specific reasons. And that's the end of this video.